Mimecast has released its State of Ransomware Readiness Report for 2022, finding that most cybersecurity leaders experience the same or increasing numbers of ransomware attacks over last year. Together with Mimecast, organizations can stand strong in the face of cyber attacks, human error, technical failure, and work protected. Mimecast, work protected. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more.
How do you win the race against risk and safely lock down your cloud data without hiring an army of administrators? Introducing Least Privilege Automation, only from Varonis. Varonis eliminates data exposures while your employees work and while they sleep, making intelligent decisions about who needs access to data and who doesn't. Our cloud-native solution analyzes permissions and sharing links, monitors access activity, and classifies sensitive data. Because Varonis knows who can and who does access critical data, our automation safely remediates risky links and permissions. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Varonis.
Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul's Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week, we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul's Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
Welcome to RSA 2023 Broadcast Alley. We are halfway through the first day. It's a beautiful day in San Francisco. The sun is shining. Everybody's out on the street. It's like RSA is back the way it's been in years past, other than that thing that happened the last couple years ago. I'm here with Kunal Anand. He is the CTO and CISO of a little company called Imperva. Kunal, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. And it's amazing to be back here. You can feel the energy.
There is a lot of energy. It's actually palpable that so many people are back, seeing people you haven't seen in years, meeting new people. We're just meeting for the first time.
It's like summer camp, right?
Yeah, only not. That's a whole different experience.
Yes.
So, Kunal, tell us a little bit briefly about Imperva. What does Imperva do? What are you about?
Yeah, so we protect the world's critical applications and data.
Okay.
And if you kind of take a step back and you think about what's going on right now, there's this wave of modernization in enterprises.
Yes.
And people have lots of applications, they have lots of APIs, they've got lots of data. Could be on-prem, could be in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, they're trying to protect all this stuff. And what we do at Imperva is we build solutions to help these organizations do that, whether it's through web application firewalls, capabilities to protect APIs, protecting networks, protecting data at rest, data in motion. That's what we do.
Interesting. And because of all the technological advances, we don't keep our data locked in safes anymore. It's pretty much everywhere.
Data is everywhere. And I think that's, you bring up a really important thing. And I think one of the problems right now is people just don't know where their data is, and then people just don't fundamentally know what's in that data.
Right. And I've been in the industry a long time. When I started many years ago, the idea of data, everybody sort of had a sense of what sensitive data was, what critical data was, what proprietary data was. But we've created whole new ecosystems of data that didn't exist before the digital age.
Totally.
That we have to think about and protect about. I mean, how many times have you had a casual conversation and all of a sudden your phone starts popping ads for what it was you were talking about? Or not even you, somebody in the room with you type of thing.
It's terrifying when that happens.
It is.
Or like when you have
Freaks me
these
out.
remnant ads that follow you around the internet, right? Because you just viewed something. I mean, I think it kind of goes back to the fact that, 20 years ago, there was one type of database, very homogeneous, structured databases, and that evolved.
Right.
And so now there's, just a plethora of data store options, whether they're structured databases, could be like the Oracles and the Microsoft SQL servers of the world,
Right.
all the way down to semi-structured, which could be these lakes and these warehouses, and that would be like the Hadoops, the Cassandras, the Mongos, all the way down to the unstructured side of things, and that would be like files that we've got really deployed everywhere. So it's funny because you talk to people and you're like, hey, do you know where all your data is? And you expect them to say, well, realistically, no, I don't really know where all my data is.
Right.
But every now and then you find these, smart CISOs who
Right.
basically say, oh, we know 100% of where everything is, and that's just categorically untrue, right?
So when I started in the private sector back in the mid-90s, and the internet was kind of a new thing, and we called it internet security. We didn't have the cool cybersecurity term back then. But a lot of the conversations that we were having was just trying to convince companies, look, if you're going to connect to the internet, you're going to have to do security, you're going to have to do things. And it was amazing how many of them really didn't care. I mean, forget that they didn't understand it, but they're like, we've got a firewall. Or
Yeah.
I had a client one time, they're like, well, we whatever the leading brand of firewall at the time was, they'd gone out and bought it. They'd gone to the training course, and they hired, I did pen testing back in those days, vulnerability assessments. And so they hired us to try to break in, and I'm just doing some initial port scanning. And of course, back in those days, every node on the network was internet reachable, in theory, which is, that's a whole different story. But I was scanning their entire network. It was like there wasn't even a firewall there. Nothing was being blocked.
Yeah.
And at some point we started talking with them and said, oh, okay, look, they actually had an incident. They were getting a DOS attack. And they, of course, were blaming us. And we're like, we're not doing anything, but let's take a time out. Let's look at your firewall rule set. And, of course, what was the final rule? Any allow. But they were very, oh yeah, we're perfect. We're well trained. We set it up right, and we know what we're doing. And then we hit we retooled and did a whole. Well, let's help you build a real architecture that's really sound and doesn't have this kind of thing happen. But I mean, over the years, almost 100%. If the clients were like, oh yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
They weren't. And if the clients were like, well, we think we've done the right things, we've tried to cover all of our bases, they tended to be in pretty good shape. And those are we probably usually still got in, but it was a little bit harder, it was a little bit more challenging. You had to go into the bag of tricks a little bit more.
But you're kind of getting at this really important thing, which is intellectual honesty. And I think that's one of the things that I've noticed.
Right.
I talk to my peers, other CISOs and other CTOs, and many of them just believe that they know everything, and it's impossible to. And when you think about and you balance it with what's going on in the industry right now, obviously, maybe we'll talk about it, but everything that we see in innovation that's getting unlocked around artificial intelligence, where I don't know if you notice it, but literally every single week, we will construct a mental model of where we think the world is going. And then every single week, it flips on its head because there's some acceleration in something.
Right.
And it's crazy to see that. And now, when people come along and they're like, yeah, we know everything, you're like, we don't even know fundamentally where this whole space is going to go.
Right.
So how can you attempt to know everything? And so I think it's really important to almost bring like a beginner's mind to what we do and what we practice. And always kind of question, all those things, and just, I don't know, just be intellectually honest
Well, and
about
people
that.
like me that have been around for a long time, and most of my war stories are 25, 30 years old, if not older. I'm talking about things that are still problems today, which is depressing on one level.
Yep.
The number one way, I saw an article that we had on one of our shows maybe a month ago, but the article was put out by some IAM company, which sent me down a whole rabbit hole. When did we stop calling it authentication and authorization and started calling it IAM? And I'm like, mental note, do the research on it, because I'll guarantee it's a company's marketing team that came up with a new product to sell, and so they had to coin a new thing so they could create it shall remain nameless quadrant in a geometric shape, if you know what I'm getting at. But
How many sides to this shape are there?
but so we're here to talk about being a CISO, and I chuckle because I live in multiple worlds in this community, and in the hacker community, CISOs are just sort of more or less the laughing stock because most of the hackers know that the CISOs don't know everything. But then you get to the more business-oriented side of things, the more vendor-driven side of things. It's catering to the CISOs, and much as I love being here, it's a prime example of how if you don't know everything, you're susceptible to a lot of really good sales pitches. And it's like the vacuum cleaner salesman. How did I ever live without this $3,000 vacuum cleaner, and I only did the $50 vacuum cleaner up until now? How do you approach, I guess, being a CISO? How do you be humble and get to the point of realizing that you don't know everything?
I think you just start by saying, A, I don't know everything. B, there are new challenges that emerge, if not daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever that might be.
Right.
And there are these sort of asymmetric approaches to solve those problems. I think it all kind of comes back to first principles thinking, which is A, identifying that there is a problem, and that is meaningful for you to solve.
Admitting that you have a problem, that type of thing?
Step number one.
Okay.
Absolutely. But also, is that problem really important for you to solve? Right? I could rattle off what my risk register looks like today, but that risk register is important to me, may not be important to you, and vice versa. So number one, quantifying your risk, and then really thinking about how do you prioritize it? And when I think about the risk register, I think about it in terms of what is the likelihood, and then what is the potential impact. So looking at it from two axes, and then figuring out where that plots. And then really targeting those key critical things, and then the goal being how do you track and how do you bring that risk down? And so I don't think about a vendor technology, or I don't think about a buzzword. I think more about here's my holistic issue, which could be, let's say, sensitive data management, or a holistic issue may be, governance of some type across a cloud-based environment. Okay, this is what I want to accomplish. If I don't do this, what's my negative behavior, or what's the negative outcome? And then how can I either, before I even go to the market and think about what else is there, what do we want to do? Do I have the right resources? Do I have the right investment to get that stuff done? Because one of the traps that we always see is people will invest in a lot of different areas and a lot of different programs. But and I know, and 2020 to 2022 were years of excess, and a lot of companies just invested in a lot of different technologies. 2023 and beyond, people want to do more with what they have.
There's a tad bit of tight belting going on.
100%. Compression.
Right now.
There is compression.
Yeah, it's that expansion and contraction type.
And the sort of look now of people saying there may be best of breed, but I'm looking at sort of best of platform. And so I'm not hearing actually do more with less. I'm hearing I want to do less with less. That's a real common phrase.
Absolutely. Yeah, I went to a talk several years ago that a friend of mine was giving, and he started out by asking the audience, how many people have enough money in your security budget? And everybody's like chuckling and laughing. And I'm like, everybody should be raising their hand, because whatever they have in their budget, that's what they have to work with. So you better pretty darn well figure out what to do with it.
It's the envelope.
Right,
it's the envelope. And you can only spend so many dollars. So, I don't get caught up in the buzz. I don't get caught up in any of those things. I know what my problems are. I know what I need to focus on. And then I try to rationalize. And if I don't have resources or bodies to go and, deal with something, then why would I make an investment? I'm just setting myself up for failure.
I mean, I know it's a rhetorical question, but I think part of the problem of our industry, without being able to find cause, but there's certainly a perception. There's a need for automation, but I think there's a perception that there's a solution out there for everything. There's a technology, there's a tool that we can set it and forget it. I mean, it's been like that for the almost 30 years that I've been in the private sector. Just don't explain to me that I have to think about things like risk and identifying and setting up processes. Just tell me what I need to buy, how many do I need, where do they need to be, and what color is the light supposed to be, and what do I do if it starts blinking red? And that's about it. And that's the extent of the mentality. I've been doing compliance for many years, and what I love about the particular thing, the branch of compliance I do, is it's forced companies to do something, even though they don't like it, they don't understand it, but they can't engage in commerce unless they're doing this one particular compliance standard. That if you're a regular on the show, I do PCI. And that's the time of the show where everybody would have to take a drink at the drinking game.
We're taking shots now?
Well, soon. It's getting late into the day. It's almost 5 o'clock here. So, I mean, what do you recommend to people that either are CISOs and want to be better, or, God forbid, there's people out there that aspire to be a CISO?
I would say several things. So I have not been, my arc was, I never wanted to be a CISO.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my career has always stemmed from technology.
Right.
So been in the CTO space, serving as CTO for a while, and before that I was very curious. So engineering, IT infrastructure, and security became interesting to me 20 years ago. And it's always been something that, I don't know, the mind works the way that it wants to.
Right.
And I've always been attracted to this idea of the attackers have an infinite amount of time to prepare an attack.
Yep.
And we have, sub-second to respond. So
Right.
that sort of incongruity, how do you balance that? And how do you deal with that? So I'm really attracted to that. But I think
Okay.
from people that are looking at the space that want to be a CISO, think with first principles.
Mm-hmm.
Think with, here are areas where we could do better, where we should be doing better. Here is the risk to the broader organization. So don't look at it just purely from a technology perspective, because it's easy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or don't look at it from like an acronym
Oh, that's
soup
the other
perspective.
problem, because it's not a technology problem.
I agree with you.
Technology is the problem.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think we have an opportunity to really strip a lot of that excess away.
I sure hope so.
Oh, we do. And I think we're going to see it.
We've made very little large, measurable progress in the grand scheme of things in the last 30 years.
The belt tightening that we alluded to, that compression that we see in the market, that will absolutely shake out what is truly necessary and versus what is excess, what is something that it's a nice to have versus a must have. We're going to see that.
Great. Well, it's been a privilege to meet you and talk to you a little bit. We could certainly talk about this for hours, but thank you for your time. If you want to find out more about Imperva and aspire to be a CISO, go to securityweekly.com/Imperva, IMPERVA RSAC. That's going to do it for us. Thank you.
Welcome to RSA Conference 2023. It's day 2. We're still in Broadcast Alley, recording live. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. For this session, I welcome John Grancarich. He is the Executive Vice President of Strategy at Fortra. John, good seeing you again.
Good seeing you too, Matt. Thanks for having me.
So the last time we spoke, you had just changed your name to Fortra. So how's it been going?
It's been going great. I think, we built a cybersecurity startup in the middle of what was help systems, and now that startup has become the company. And so with the rebrand, it kind of sealed the deal and made it official that, this is who we are, and really a big part of our identity now is really around Fortra.
Yeah, I think what's amazing when I prepared for that interview is just the number of cybersecurity acquisitions help systems had done building up to this, right? And Core Security was one of the early sponsors of Security Weekly, so there's a long history there with Core Security team, and then you've got all these other acquisitions that you guys have pulled together over the years, and not many people have been able to pull this off. Like when I look at a lot of the big platform plays, you see acquisitions happen, but then you see pieces of them just not be what they were before the acquisition. You guys have preserved that, I think, pretty well in the acquisitions that you've done. And I think that leads into this conversation, which is around security maturity versus operational burden. Because as we were preparing for this, we're seeing the consolidation play in the market, right? We're definitely seeing tighter budgets and the desire of CISOs to consolidate their vendor selections down. And so when you have a company like Fortra that has lots of capabilities, it provides a really good foundation. Let's talk a little bit about how that kind of strategy has led into this consolidation play.
Sure. So when we were putting together the vision and the strategy for Fortra, the first thing that we always do is we talk to the customers, we look at the market. And one of the initial, I think, observations we had was you had these really big mega companies who had a lot of breadth, but not necessarily a lot of depth on the controls and capability side. And then curiously, there was also a lot of best of breed companies who had a lot of depth, but not a lot of breadth. And we kind of saw this space right in the middle. And we thought, well, maybe we can fit right there and do something that's more comprehensive, but a lot deeper than what's out there. We then looked at various product categories. We started to ask ourselves, where could we really develop core competencies, be the best in the world at something? So we had to really focus, and we chose infrastructure protection, data protection, managed services, and security awareness training, and said, if we could bring these together, for the exact reason that you mentioned, right? Having a conversation with a CISO or a security team that says you can work with a single provider across a broader range of solutions and not have to compromise on the depth of the capabilities, that is really kind of what underpinned the vision and the strategy. And so that's really what's kind of pushed us forward all this time.
Yeah, I mean, for years we talked best of breed, best of breed, best of breed. Best of breed is fine when the markets are wide open, budgets are free flowing. Best of breed kind of starts to fall down a little bit when we come into some headwinds like we have in the economy, because now it's like, wait, I got to manage all these vendors. I got to figure out how to piece all these together. I don't have the headcount I used to have to piece it all together. Can I get all of these from a single provider? So your patience, I think, is what's really interesting, is having built the strategy over the past few years, you actually put yourself in a position that I think is different than a lot of other providers in the space, because you wanted the breadth with the depth, and now you have the consolidation story.
We do, and when we talk with security teams, it's interesting, you mentioned the word cost. So there's financial cost, but there's also resource cost and energy cost and time cost. And so we really redefined what cost was to look across all those different areas and said, well, how can we solve those cohesively together? When we work with customers today, typically they'll start with us with a single solution, but then once we deliver success, they're always interested in figuring out, hey, well, what else do you guys do? This is working out pretty well.
Yeah.
We're well positioned for that, but that strategy has been years in the making and in the execution.
Yeah, because I think a lot of organizations, the podcast we did yesterday, we pre-recorded it last week, was around closing the skills gap. And there was an interesting debate we had on, is there a headcount shortage? Or is it just literally a skills gap shortage, right? Because those are two different problems to solve, right? If it's a headcount problem, well, there's a ton of layoffs in the tech space. We can go find the headcount. I think it's more of a skills gap, like having the skills needed to support these tools are where we're struggling, and therefore that adds a lot of operational burden to the organization to find those resources to pull all this stuff together.
Yep. And with that skills gap comes a lot of inefficiency, right? Because it's not the responsibility of cybersecurity professionals to figure this out. It's really the responsibility of vendors to think more cohesively about how to bring together their capabilities. So one of the things that we're doing on that front is, so we're not going to fix the skills shortage or the resource gap overnight. What we can do and what we are doing is making it easier to use our products and common design system, common user interface system. Once you learn a single Fortra product, it's easier for a customer to say, well, I already know how to use product A. I can move over to product B, get that breadth across the portfolio, but not have to relearn from scratch. And so we're finding a lot of ways to economize in this difficult environment, I think, for the long term.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting strategy, because I think a lot of organizations, a lot of security vendors struggle with that, right? Is integrating a bunch of different technologies with a single look and feel user experience, right? It sounds easy. Jason would say easy, do hard. It is really hard to do. And so it's interesting that you've built kind of that user interface to have that consistent experience.
When we built the strategy for Fortra, we actually thought platform first. And what was interesting was we didn't even have the products at that time, but we saw the long-term opportunity to build the platform. So one of the very first things that we started to invest in was the common user interface, and said, in the future, regardless of what type of security product or control that comes to Fortra, we wanted to look, function, and interact the same for customers. And at the time, nobody had really done that. So that's what we're moving toward now. So we're beginning to slowly but surely bring the product into that common experience, and it's incredible to see that come to fruition at this point.
Yeah, because the learning curve goes down dramatically. You don't have to train new staff on a whole different interface or a whole different administrative interface. It's just, it's the same.
It's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same. And if you think about it, once you've got the unified user experience, behind that experience, you can put really incredible things in place, like machine learning, like centralized threat intelligence. So all this stuff gets powered. It's really complex stuff, but the complexity is pushed behind the scenes. And what we bring to the front is what the teams need to focus on. What is the most important noise, suspicious signal to focus on? And let's help them do their work more efficiently, more productively, and improve that security maturity along the way.
So you talked through kind of where you started, infrastructure, data security, security awareness training, some managed services. I'm a big app user data guy. I think those are security controls that organizations will always have to deal with, right? You've got the data security play. You're doing a little bit with the user on the security awareness side. where does the strategy take you next? Like, do you go more into the user identity space? Do you start to go after the application side? You've got some device scanning capability already. Like, now that you have the foundation, like, you can go in a few different directions and continue to build out more of this holistic capability.
Yeah, this is kind of the key strategic question for Fortra, right? Which is, do we go broader or do we go deeper? And while we're still working through that conversation, one of the things we have aligned on at the company is for the categories that we participate in today, those pillars that you talked about, we want to be the best in the world at those, right? And so basically, let's make sure that what we have, we're executing on flawlessly, right? And you mentioned the progress we've made in just a few years' time. You mentioned, it's been difficult for some companies to kind of make that leap. For us, focus is the key. And so we make uncomfortable decisions all the time and say no to things or not yet so that we can stay focused on really kind of where the core of the business is. And, you can't be everything to everybody, but you can absolutely be the best in the world at a handful of things. That's really our focus right now.
Got it. So stay very focused. Make sure you're building, because I think it's the full end-to-end integration that really wins the long game here, because if the products work very smoothly together and they interact with each other in a very robust way, that by itself has tremendous value for the customer versus having, oh wait, I can go do that app scanning over there and try to figure out how to tie it in, right? So stay very focused, go depth, only on the few things that really are in your core purview today.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, our view is that the security industry eventually becomes a platform industry, and it'll be, a handful perhaps of companies that are going to be kind of at that table, and that's really where Fortra wants to be, is one of those platform companies that's at the table. But it's not just one company, right? We have to recognize and appreciate that security is so complex, it's so nuanced, it changes so rapidly. So rather than try to just cover everything at a superficial level, let's get really focused, really specific, but really absolutely do a fantastic job of where we're focused on.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. I like the new tech though, so you always got to be like, wait, what's the next thing, right? That you want to do, and that's why some of these other spaces for me are so interesting, because I can see where long term, as more and more stuff moves to the cloud, right? You've seen this pivot from on-prem infrastructure to now cloud infrastructure, protections, and all the things around applications. And so over time, as you start thinking about building out a more holistic platform, those are areas that come in. That's why I was curious, like, where do you go next? It sounds like you go deeper first, then you figure out what that next pillar of capabilities for Fortra would be.
Yeah, and you make an interesting point about kind of how the landscape, the infrastructure landscape is evolving, and we're in this really kind of fluid world where infrastructure, applications, how people interact with their technology environments is just changing every moment.
Yeah.
And that creates this kind of moving target sort of environment where where's the next risk going to come from? And the answer to the question is you have to really think of it from a business perspective. The landscape might be changing every moment, but where are you going to focus as a business? Where is your critical mass going to be? We have a lot of conversations with organizations, and they come to us, they want to talk about security controls. The first couple of questions we always ask is help us to understand what assets you're most trying to protect and which risks are top of mind for you. And sometimes they're not quite ready for that conversation yet because they're thinking controls first.
Right.
What we're trying to do is bring it back to the business conversation and make sure that we're looking through the right lens, because odds are we've got something that's going to be able to help them materially move forward. Yeah,
it's funny because when we were doing our minimum viable security segment back in January, asset management was like number one on the list, but it's the one thing most organizations, it's not sexy to talk asset management, right? But without understanding what assets you have to protect, like, how do you know how to protect them? It's like a fundamental step, but yet one that we just have not done a very good job of. And then you talk about understanding the business risks, right? That's the other conversation. As the CISO role has evolved, they're starting to have those conversations at the business level. It's getting the rest of the security team to understand that they're there to support the business. And so you're asking the right questions, which is interesting because not a lot of vendors are asking those questions. They're just like, hey, we've got this thing that solves this problem. You want us because we're the best. Instead of stepping back and saying, no, what are those assets? What are those risks you're trying to do? And then formulate a strategy for what the security program should look like.
We have a lot of conversations with customers, and what we ask them is, if you were presenting to your board of directors today or to your investors, what is it that you would need to be able to tell them? So we think from the result first and work backward from that. And it's not a question they get asked a lot, but it really helps to drive that focus that we're looking for, and it helps us to really kind of plug into a specific place, reduce that sense of overwhelm that they have when they're dealing with, because they're all dealing with that sense of like, oh my gosh, where do I focus next?
Yeah.
Well, we've been taking a much more iterative approach to it, and I think that helps business people, and that includes CISOs and technology leaders, to have those kinds of conversations, and probably most importantly, to build trust with their own stakeholders, and then we position ourselves as a partner on that journey for them.
Yeah, if the CISO wants to have a seat at the table, they have to work very closely with the business. This is a way for them to actually start to have those conversations and then develop a security program with a vendor that can provide lots of capabilities in a much more operationally efficient way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, and when we think about operational efficiency, it's not just technology, it's also things like unified support, unified services, unified account management. Fortra thinks of the experience of security as really an end-to-end experience that goes far beyond technology. So we're really trying to unify and streamline all those elements. The better of a job we do with that, we will absolutely help companies get more mature in their security posture, but also, to your earlier point, make it more cost-effective and efficient to do so.
Yeah, and that's what everybody needs in this economy.
Absolutely.
John, it was an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt.
If anybody wants to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Fortra RSAC. Stay tuned. We have more interviews coming up.